The laughter started the moment Naomi Carter walked into the room. Not loud laughter. Not the kind people openly admitted to. Just quiet smirks. Whispers behind expensive suits. The kind of laughter powerful people used when they thought someone didn't belong. Rain hammered against the glass walls of the 42nd floor boardroom in downtown Chicago as Naomi stepped inside, carrying a black leather portfolio under one arm. Every executive at the table turned toward her. Then came the looks. Confused. Dismissive. Amused. One gray-haired board member leaned toward another and muttered quietly, "Please don't tell me she's leading negotiations." A few people chuckled. Another executive glanced at Naomi's simple black blazer and whispered, "Maybe HR sent her." More laughter. Naomi heard every word. But her face never changed. Because Naomi Carter had spent her entire life being underestimated. And she learned something dangerous a long time ago. The people who laugh first usually panic hardest later. At the far end of the massive table sat Richard Vaughn, CEO of Vaughn and Mercer, a billionaire respected on Wall Street and feared inside every room he entered. He barely looked up from his papers. Without even standing, he pointed casually toward the coffee station near the wall. "Refreshments are over there." The room exploded with louder laughter. Naomi stopped walking. For one long second, silence floated through the room like tension before a storm. Then Naomi calmly placed her portfolio on the table and looked directly at Richard Vaughn. "I'm not here to serve coffee," she said softly. The laughter faded immediately. Richard slowly lifted his eyes toward her. And for the first time all morning, the room became uncomfortable. Because nobody there realized the quiet black woman they mocked controlled the one deal standing between their company and complete financial collapse. Naomi Carter was 38 years old, and most people underestimated her within the first 5 seconds of meeting her. Maybe it was because she spoke softly. Maybe it was because she never raised her voice. Or maybe it was because people in rooms full of power rarely expected a black woman to carry more authority than everyone sitting at the table. Rain slammed against the glass windows of the Vaughn and Mercer Tower in downtown Chicago as Naomi stepped out of the elevator onto the 42nd floor. The boardroom doors stood open. Inside, nervous executives whispered to each other while assistants rushed between seats carrying folders and coffee. The company was bleeding money. Everyone in the room knew it, but nobody wanted to say it out loud. Naomi adjusted the sleeve of her black blazer and walked calmly into the room carrying a thin leather portfolio. Conversations slowed. Several people looked at her. Then the smiling started. A gray-haired executive leaned toward another man and whispered something. Both laughed. Another woman glanced at Naomi's simple outfit and muttered, "Guess the diversity consultants finally arrived." Naomi heard every word. She kept walking. At the far end of the room sat Richard Vaughn, CEO, powerful, arrogant, the kind of man who smiled while destroying careers. He barely looked at her. "Coffee station is outside," he said casually while flipping through papers. Several people laughed louder. Naomi slowly placed her portfolio on the table. "I'm aware," she replied. The room quieted slightly. Richard finally looked up. His expression changed for half a second. Only half. "Ah," he said. "Naomi Carter." He leaned back. "The investment representative." Naomi nodded. No apology came. Of course not. Richard gestured toward an empty chair near the far corner of the room. "You can sit there." Naomi noticed every executive sitting closer to Richard, while her chair sat almost separated from the group. Intentional. Everything in rooms like this was intentional. She sat anyway. The meeting began immediately. Charts filled the massive screen. Numbers, growth projections, recovery plans, promises, too many promises. Naomi listened carefully while executives spoke over each other, trying to sound confident. But underneath the rehearsed language, she heard fear. Real fear. Richard stood confidently at the front. "With this merger," he announced, "we position ourselves for explosive expansion over the next 18 months. Naomi flipped through the financial report. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. The debt numbers didn't match the earlier projections sent to her firm. Entire transaction pages were missing. Interesting. One board member laughed loudly after Richard made a joke about surviving another disaster quarter. Everyone else forced laughter. Naomi remained silent. Richard noticed. "Something amusing missing from your copy?" he asked. Several heads turned. Naomi calmly looked up. "The offshore liabilities aren't included." Silence. Several executives froze. Richard's smile tightened. "What liabilities?" he asked. Naomi slowly slid one paper forward. "These transfers." Marcus Hale, the company's CFO, immediately looked pale. Richard glanced at Marcus. Only for a second, but Naomi noticed. "You're misunderstanding internal restructuring," Richard replied smoothly. Naomi kept her voice calm. $300 million isn't restructuring. Someone near the back scoffed. "This is why investors shouldn't play accountant." Another man laughed. Naomi looked directly at him. "Interesting," she said softly, "considering your department approved the transfers." The laughter stopped. Richard quickly interrupted. "Let's stay focused." But the energy inside the room had shifted. Naomi could feel it. People were nervous now, very nervous. The meeting continued. More presentations, more forced confidence, more lies. Naomi quietly studied every reaction. Marcus avoided eye contact. One executive kept checking his phone. Another woman looked seconds away from panic. Then Naomi noticed an open folder near the center of the table. Inside were pension reports, employee retirement accounts, missing funds. Her stomach tightened. Thousands of workers, families, lives. Richard noticed her staring. He calmly closed the folder. "Confidential," he said. Naomi looked directly at him. "So is fraud." The room exploded with tension. Nobody laughed now. Richard walked toward her slowly. His smile disappeared completely. "You're making dangerous assumptions." Naomi didn't move. "And you're hiding dangerous numbers?" Marcus suddenly stood. "We should take a break." Richard snapped his head toward him. "No." The sharpness in his voice startled everyone. Marcus slowly sat back down. Naomi understood something immediately. Richard was losing control. That terrified him. The meeting paused briefly while assistants distributed updated reports. Naomi's phone vibrated under the table. Unknown number. One message. "Do not sign anything. They've been lying to everyone." Naomi slowly lifted her eyes. Around the room, executives smiled nervously, like nothing was wrong. But Naomi finally understood. This company wasn't struggling. It was collapsing. And everyone inside the room knew it. Naomi barely slept that night. Chicago glowed outside her hotel window while rain continued pouring across the city. She sat alone in darkness, replaying every expression from the meeting, especially Marcus Hale. Fear like that didn't come from accounting mistakes. It came from secrets. Naomi closed her eyes. Suddenly, she was 12 years old again. Detroit. Cold apartment. Her father walking through the front door wearing factory gloves covered in grease. "Tough day?" she used to ask. He always smiled anyway. "Every day's tough," he would say. "That's why character matters." Her father raised her alone after her mother died from cancer. He worked night shifts, construction jobs, warehouse loading, anything that kept food on the table. But no matter how tired he was, he never let Naomi believe life owed her pity. "People will underestimate you," he told her once while helping with homework. "You don't waste energy proving them wrong. You outlast them." Naomi carried those words her entire life, especially through college, especially through Wall Street, especially through rooms full of people who smiled at her face while questioning her intelligence behind closed doors. She remembered her first internship in New York. A senior executive once handed her his lunch order during a meeting. She had actually prepared the financial model, saving the company millions. He never even knew. Naomi learned something early. Powerful people rarely listened until they were afraid. Her mentor, Evelyn Mercer, taught her the rest. Evelyn was one of the only women in private equity who terrified billionaires. She once told Naomi, "Never interrupt arrogant people while they're exposing themselves." Naomi followed that advice carefully. That was why she stayed calm in the boardroom. Not because she wasn't angry, because anger clouded judgment. And Naomi needed clarity. Her phone rang. Evelyn, you look exhausted, Evelyn said immediately through video call. You can tell through a phone? Naomi asked. I can tell through silence. Naomi explained everything. The missing reports, the offshore accounts, the tension. Evelyn listened carefully. Then she leaned closer. Walk away. Naomi frowned. That bad? Worse. Naomi stared at the city lights. But if the merger collapses, thousands of employees lose their pensions. And if you sign a fraudulent deal, your career dies beside theirs. Naomi hated when Evelyn was right. The next morning, Naomi returned to Vaughn and Mercer headquarters. The atmosphere had changed. Executives whispered nervously. Phones rang nonstop. Stock prices had dipped overnight. Richard Vaughn stood near the windows, speaking aggressively into his phone. When he noticed Naomi entering, his smile returned instantly. Fake, polished, dangerous. Miss Carter, he said warmly. Ready to continue? Naomi noticed Marcus sitting alone, sweating, avoiding eye contact again. The meeting resumed. This time, Naomi paid closer attention to the financial reports. Something was missing. Pages. Entire sections. She slowly flipped backward, then forward. Missing. Someone had removed transaction records. Naomi quietly looked up. Marcus froze when their eyes met. He knew she noticed. Richard continued presenting expansion plans confidently. But Naomi barely listened anymore. Because now she knew one thing for certain. Someone inside the company was actively hiding evidence. And the deeper she looked, the more dangerous this situation became. The tension inside the boardroom thickened like smoke. Nobody trusted anyone anymore. Naomi could feel it. Richard Vaughn kept smiling, but his confidence looked forced now. Every few minutes, he glanced toward Marcus Hale. Marcus looked seconds away from collapse. Naomi slowly reviewed another set of financial reports. Still incomplete. Still manipulated. Richard finally stopped speaking and faced her directly. Do you have concerns? Naomi closed the folder carefully. Yes. The room became silent again. You reported employee pension reserves at 82% stability. Richard nodded. That's correct. Naomi slid another document across the table. This audit says 46. A woman near the end of the table cursed under her breath. Marcus closed his eyes. Richard didn't move. Where did you get that? He asked quietly. Naomi ignored the question. How many employees know their retirement accounts were exposed to offshore debt? Nobody answered. Richard slowly smiled again. Miss Carter, corporate finance is more complicated than headlines and percentages. Several executives laughed weakly. Naomi remained calm. I agree. Richard folded his hands. Then perhaps you should avoid dramatic assumptions. Naomi leaned back slightly. And perhaps you should avoid criminal ones. The room exploded into shouting. One executive stood immediately. This is outrageous. Another pointed toward Naomi. She's trying to sabotage negotiations. Richard lifted his hand. Everyone became quiet again. Naomi noticed something important. Even Richard couldn't fully control the panic anymore. Then the boardroom door opened. A young intern entered carrying coffee. Nervous. Quiet. He placed a cup beside Naomi. As he walked away, a folded note slipped beside her folder. Nobody noticed. Naomi opened it slowly beneath the table. Checked the Cayman transfers. Her pulse slowed. Not fear. Focus. Someone inside the company wanted the truth exposed. Naomi opened her laptop discreetly and searched transaction records connected to the offshore accounts. Her stomach tightened instantly. Millions missing. Hidden shell companies. Fake consulting firms. Money disappearing through multiple international accounts. This wasn't reckless management. This was organized fraud. And someone at the highest level approved it. Naomi slowly looked toward Richard Vaughn. He was already staring at her, smiling. But this time, his eyes looked cold. Very cold. Naomi finally understood something terrifying. Richard Vaughn wasn't trying to save the company. He was trying to survive it. Naomi left the building long after sunset. The rain had stopped, but Chicago still looked cold. Lights reflected across wet streets while traffic moved slowly beneath the towering skyline. Her phone vibrated. Her father. Naomi answered immediately. "Dad? You sound tired," he said softly. His voice always calmed her. Even now. Even after the stroke. "I'm fine," Naomi lied. "You only call me Naomi when you're lying." That made her smile. Barely. Her father spent most of his days inside a rehabilitation center outside the city. The stroke had weakened his left side, but not his mind. Never his mind. "You still trying to save the world?" he asked. "Something like that." Naomi looked back toward Vaughn and Mercer Tower. Thousands of employees depended on that company. Families, retirements, medical insurance. If the merger failed, people would lose everything. But if the merger succeeded under fraudulent numbers, the collapse would be even worse later. Naomi felt trapped between disaster and catastrophe. The next morning, she visited the rehabilitation center. Her father sat near a window, watching snow begin falling lightly outside. "You got that look again," he said. "What look?" "The one your mother used to get when she carried too much pain quietly." Naomi sat beside him. For a moment, she almost told him everything. The fraud, the missing money, the threats. But she stopped herself. Instead, she asked, "Did you ever get tired of being strong?" Her father smiled sadly. "Every day." "Then why keep doing it?" "Because people needed me to." Naomi lowered her eyes. That answer hurt more than she expected. As she prepared to leave, her father grabbed her wrist gently. "Don't let powerful people scare you into silence." Naomi froze. "How did you know?" "Because fear follows money." That night, Naomi reviewed pension reports again inside her hotel room. Then she saw it. Executive bonuses. Massive ones. Paid weeks before the company reported losses publicly. Richard Vaughn knew the company was collapsing. He protected executives first. Workers last. Naomi stared at the numbers. Her anger finally surfaced. Not loud anger. Cold anger. The dangerous kind. Her phone suddenly rang. A no number. She answered carefully. A distorted voice whispered, "If you expose them, they'll destroy you too." The line disconnected. Naomi sat completely still. Someone was watching. And the deeper she searched, the more dangerous this became. Naomi barely slept again. By morning, news articles had already started appearing online. Questions about the merger. Rumors about instability. Anonymous accusations. Then Naomi saw her own name. One article claimed she was sabotaging negotiations for personal profit. Another suggested she lacked experience handling billion-dollar deals. Naomi understood immediately. Richard Vaughn was attacking her credibility. Classic corporate warfare. She arrived at headquarters and immediately noticed security watching her more closely. Interesting. Inside the boardroom, nobody smiled anymore. Marcus Hale looked worse than ever. His hands trembled while reviewing papers. Richard spoke smoothly. Negative press spreads quickly these days. Naomi ignored him, especially when someone pays for it. A few executives exchanged nervous looks. Richard chuckled. "You think I'm afraid of you?" Naomi looked directly into his eyes. "No." She paused. "I think you're afraid of prison." Marcus suddenly dropped his pen. The room froze. Richard's smile vanished instantly. After the meeting, Marcus approached Naomi privately near the elevators. "We need to talk." Naomi studied him carefully. "You should have said that days ago." Marcus looked exhausted. They moved pension funds through offshore accounts years ago. Naomi remained calm. "Who approved it?" Marcus swallowed hard. "Richard." Naomi felt no surprise. "Only confirmation." Marcus continued. "It started small. Then investors demanded bigger returns. Eventually, nobody knew how to stop it. You knew. Marcus lowered his head. I was trying to fix it quietly. Naomi almost laughed. Quiet corruption still destroys lives. Marcus handed her a flash drive. Everything's here. Naomi took it carefully. Why now? Marcus looked terrified. Because people are disappearing. Naomi frowned. What does that mean? Marcus stepped backward. You don't understand how connected Richard is. Before Naomi could respond, Marcus hurried away. That night, Naomi returned to her hotel. The hallway lights flickered strangely. Her room door was slightly open. Naomi froze. Slowly, silently, she pushed the door wider. Everything inside had been destroyed. Drawers ripped open. Laptop shattered. Papers everywhere. And written across the broken mirror, walk away. The police called it vandalism. Naomi called it a message. She sat inside the damaged hotel room while officers photographed broken furniture. Nothing valuable had been stolen. Only documents. Specific documents. Richard Vaughn wanted her afraid. Unfortunately for him, Naomi had spent her entire life surviving fear. Still, exhaustion weighed heavily on her. For the first time in years, she considered leaving. She could walk away, protect herself, protect her father, let someone else carry the burden. But every time she imagined quitting, she saw workers losing retirement savings while executives escaped wealthy and untouched. That anger kept her moving. Naomi met Evelyn Mercer later that afternoon inside a quiet restaurant. Evelyn listened carefully while Naomi explained the break-in. Then Evelyn leaned closer. They're panicking. Naomi frowned. That doesn't make me feel safer. It shouldn't. Evelyn stirred her coffee slowly. Powerful people become dangerous when exposure feels inevitable. Naomi stared through the window. I'm tired. Evelyn nodded. Good. Naomi looked confused. Tired people stop pretending. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Then Evelyn quietly asked, how much did Richard steal? Naomi slid a folder across the table. Evelyn opened it. Her expression darkened immediately. This isn't just fraud. I know. These acquisitions were funded illegally. Naomi nodded slowly. And pension accounts covered the losses. Evelyn closed the folder. They'll bury everyone connected to this. Naomi's phone vibrated. A secure message. New evidence uploaded. Naomi opened the files. Signed approvals. Transfers. Executive authorization records. Richard Vaughn's name appeared repeatedly. Naomi finally had proof. Real proof. But before she could speak, another message appeared. Marcus Hale is missing. Naomi's blood ran cold. The city woke up to chaos. Financial blogs exploded with rumors. Investors demanded answers. Stock prices dropped another 9% before noon. Inside Vaughn and Mercer headquarters, panic spread quietly through every hallway. Naomi arrived early. Security stopped her at the entrance. New authorization procedures, one guard explained nervously. Naomi stared at him calmly. Or new intimidation procedures? The guard looked embarrassed. He stepped aside. Inside the executive floor, Richard Vaughn stood near the boardroom windows overlooking Chicago. He looked tired now, older, but still dangerous. You're creating problems, he said without turning around. Naomi remained standing. You created them. Richard smiled faintly. Everyone benefits from profitable companies, not the employees losing pensions. Richard finally turned. You still think this is about morality? Naomi said nothing. Richard walked closer. I can make this very easy for you. He slid a folder across the table. Inside was an offer. A massive payout. Millions. Enough to disappear comfortably forever. Naomi closed the folder. No. Richard's jaw tightened. You should think carefully. I already did. For the first time, real anger appeared in Richard's eyes. You have no idea how this world works. Naomi stood slowly. No, I understand it perfectly. She walked toward the door, then stopped, and that's why you're afraid. Hours later, emergency news alerts flashed across business networks. Marcus Hale had been found unconscious inside his apartment. Possible overdose. Naomi didn't believe it for 1 second. Neither did Evelyn. At the hospital, Marcus looked pale and terrified. He grabbed Naomi's wrist weakly. They know I talked. Naomi leaned closer. Who? Marcus's eyes filled with fear. Everyone. Before he could say more, monitors suddenly began beeping wildly. Doctors rushed into the room. Naomi stepped backward as chaos exploded around her. And deep inside, she realized something terrifying. This situation was no longer just corporate corruption. People were getting hurt. Marcus survived. Barely. Doctors claimed exhaustion and medication interaction caused the collapse. Naomi didn't trust the explanation. Neither did Marcus. When she visited him again 2 days later, security guards stood outside his hospital room. Private security, not police. Interesting. Marcus looked broken. Not physically. Emotionally. I tried stopping it years ago, he whispered. Naomi sat quietly beside him. Then why didn't you? Marcus stared at the ceiling. Because I liked the money. Honest. Finally, honest. I kept telling myself I'd fix it later. Naomi understood that kind of self-deception. Powerful people rarely become corrupt overnight. They compromise slowly, one decision at a time. Marcus looked toward her. They'll destroy anyone who talks. Naomi folded her arms. They already tried. For the first time, Marcus almost smiled. Meanwhile, outside the hospital, protesters gathered near company headquarters. Workers demanded answers. Retired employees cried during interviews. One woman said she invested 30 years into Vaughn and Mercer. Now she feared losing everything. Naomi watched the footage alone later that night. Her chest tightened. This was no longer about numbers. It was about people. Real people. That realization changed something inside her. She stopped thinking like an investor. She started thinking like a protector. Then her phone rang. Federal investigators. They requested a meeting immediately. Naomi arrived at a government office downtown early the next morning. 2 investigators questioned her for nearly 3 hours. Financial transfers, executive approvals, offshore accounts, political donations, everything connected. One investigator finally leaned forward. Miss Carter, this company is collapsing faster than anyone expected. Naomi stayed calm. What happens now? The investigator looked grim. That depends who talks first. As Naomi exited the building, dozens of federal vehicles suddenly sped toward Vaughn and Mercer headquarters. Lights flashing. Sirens echoing through downtown Chicago. People stopped on sidewalks, watching in shock. Naomi stood frozen. The war had officially become public. By noon, every major news network covered the federal investigation. Vaughn and Mercer stock collapsed another 20%. Employees flooded social media with panic. Investors demanded emergency meetings. And Richard Vaughn blamed Naomi Carter publicly. She manipulated negotiations for personal leverage, he announced during a press conference. Naomi watched from her hotel room in disbelief. The lies came easily to him. Too easily. Her phone exploded with messages. Reporters. Executives. Lawyers. Threats. One message simply read, "You should have stayed quiet." Outside her hotel, protesters gathered carrying signs. Some supported her. Others blamed her for the company collapse. Naomi suddenly understood something painful. Truth rarely protects people immediately. Sometimes it destroys everything first. That evening, Naomi met privately with senior partners from her investment firm. They looked furious. "You damaged the deal," one man snapped. Naomi stayed calm. The deal was built on fraud. Another executive leaned forward. Fraud can be negotiated quietly. Naomi stared at him. No, corruption survives quietly. The room became silent. Then the oldest partner spoke. Finalize the merger. Naomi blinked. You can't be serious. We protect the firm first. Naomi realized the sickness extended far beyond Vaughn and Mercer. Money mattered more than morality everywhere. As she prepared to leave, one executive stopped her. Walk away now and your career survives. Naomi looked directly at him. If surviving means becoming them, I'm not interested. She walked out. But inside the elevator, her hands finally trembled. Not fear. Exhaustion. She was fighting billionaires, politicians, and now her own firm. Then her phone buzzed again. Anonymous message. Check Daniel Reed. Naomi froze. Daniel was one of her closest colleagues, one of the only people she trusted. Suddenly, her stomach dropped. Because deep down, she already knew. Someone inside her own circle had betrayed her. Naomi didn't want to believe it. Daniel Reed had worked beside her for almost 8 years. They survived impossible negotiations together. Long nights, financial crises, corporate wars. He was one of the few people who treated her like an equal from the beginning. Or at least, she thought he did. Naomi sat alone inside her apartment, staring at old photos on her phone. Business conferences, celebrations, victory dinners. Daniel smiling beside her. The betrayal felt personal in a way corporate corruption never could. She arranged a private meeting. Daniel arrived nervous. Too nervous. You wanted to see me? He asked. Naomi remained seated. Why? Daniel avoided eye contact immediately. That told her everything. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, he whispered. Naomi laughed softly. Painfully. People always say that after betrayal. Daniel rubbed his face. Richard promised the merger would stabilize everything. And you believed him? He promised everyone protection. Naomi stared at him. You sold me out. Daniel's silence confirmed it. Naomi felt something inside her crack quietly. Not rage. Disappointment. The deeper kind. You leaked information about me. Daniel nodded slowly. You manipulated negotiations. Another nod. You knew pension accounts were being destroyed. Daniel finally looked at her. I didn't know how bad it became. Naomi stood. That's the problem with selfish people. Daniel swallowed hard. You think you're controlling corruption until corruption controls you. Daniel suddenly reached into his briefcase. Naomi tensed. He pulled out a hard drive. I copied backup files before Richard deleted them. Naomi stared. What's inside? Everything. Transfers. Political payments. Executive approvals. Illegal acquisitions. Enough evidence to destroy everyone involved. Naomi slowly took the drive. Why help me now? Daniel looked broken. Because innocent people are suffering. Naomi almost answered. Then her phone rang. Hospital. Her father's condition had suddenly worsened. Naomi raced through the hospital corridors, feeling her heartbeat pound inside her chest. Doctors moved quickly around her. Machines beeped loudly. Fear wrapped itself around her like ice. When she finally reached her father's room, he looked weak, smaller somehow, but his eyes still carried the same quiet strength. You look terrified, he whispered. Naomi sat beside him immediately. I almost lost you. Her father smiled faintly. No, not yet. Naomi lowered her head. For the first time in years, tears slipped down her face. She hated crying, especially in front of people. But exhaustion finally broke through her emotional walls. Her father squeezed her hand gently. You've been carrying too much alone. Naomi wiped her eyes quickly. I don't know how to stop. You don't stop. He paused. You remember who you are. Those words stayed with her long after she left the room. By morning, Naomi made her decision. No more fear. No more hesitation. No more protecting powerful people. She met with federal investigators again and handed over Daniel's hard drive. The investigators stared silently while reviewing the files. One finally looked up. This is enough to destroy the board. Naomi folded her arms. Then destroy it. Outside the building, workers gathered supporting her publicly for the first time. Homemade signs, messages, hope. Naomi stood quietly watching them. One older employee stepped forward. "My pension paid for my wife's cancer treatment," he said. His voice shook. "Thank you for fighting." Naomi suddenly realized something important. This fight stopped being about proving herself long ago. Now it was about protecting people who never had power. That night, Marcus Hale agreed to testify publicly. And somewhere inside Vaughn and Mercer Tower, Richard Vaughn finally understood. The empire was collapsing, which made him more dangerous than ever. Late that evening, Naomi returned to the rehabilitation center. Security guards suddenly surrounded the entrance. One rushed toward her. "Miss Carter," he said nervously. "There was an incident." Naomi's blood turned cold. "Where's my father?" Naomi ran through the building. Every terrible thought imaginable flooded her mind. When she reached her father's room, she nearly collapsed with relief. He was alive. Shaken, but alive. Someone had attempted entering the rehabilitation center using fake medical credentials. Security intercepted them before reaching his floor. Naomi stood beside the window, trying to steady her breathing. Richard Vaughn crossed another line. This was no longer business. Her father watched her carefully. "They finally scared you," he said softly. Naomi nodded once. "Yes." "Good." She looked confused. "Fear reminds you what matters." Naomi sat beside him quietly. "I can still walk away." Her father smiled sadly. "No, you can't." Naomi looked down. He was right. Some battles change people permanently. There was no returning to normal after this. Her father reached for her hand. "Legacy isn't money." Naomi listened carefully. "It's what survives after fear leaves the room." Those words stayed inside her all night. The next morning, Naomi prepared for the emergency board meeting. The final one, federal investigators coordinated quietly nearby. Investors demanded answers. News helicopters circled downtown Chicago. Everyone sensed the ending approaching. Before entering the building, Naomi received one final phone call. Richard Vaughn. "You still have time to stop this," he said calmly. Naomi stepped into the elevator. "No." Richard's voice hardened. "You have no idea who you're really fighting." The line disconnected. Naomi stared at her reflection inside the elevator doors. For the first time since this nightmare began, she stopped feeling underestimated. Now she felt dangerous. The boardroom looked completely different now. Nobody laughed. Nobody smiled. Fear sat openly across every face. Executives whispered nervously while lawyers crowded the walls. Outside the windows, news helicopters hovered over downtown Chicago. Richard Vaughn entered last. Still composed. Still polished. But his eyes betrayed him. He knew the end was close. Naomi sat calmly near the center of the table. This time, nobody pushed her toward the corner. Interesting how quickly power changes seating arrangements. Richard cleared his throat. "We are here to stabilize confidence." Naomi almost smiled. Confidence. The company lost billions. Federal agents waited downstairs. Employees protested outside. And Richard still spoke like a politician. Naomi slowly opened her folder. "I have updated financial records." The room became silent immediately. Richard's jaw tightened. Naomi continued. $300 million moved through illegal offshore structures. Several executives lowered their eyes. Employee pension accounts covered executive losses. A woman near the end of the table started crying quietly. Naomi placed another document forward. Multiple acquisitions violated federal regulations. Richard finally stood. "This is manipulation." Naomi looked directly at him. "No." She paused. "This is accountability." Richard slammed his hand against the table. You think you can destroy this company? Naomi stayed calm. You destroyed it yourself. Phones suddenly began vibrating across the room. Investors withdrawing. Stock prices collapsing further. Banking freezes beginning. The panic spread instantly. One executive rushed toward the door. Another began shouting at lawyers. Richard tried regaining control. Everyone sit down. Nobody listened. Then Naomi delivered the final blow. We also recovered deleted backups. Richard froze completely. For the first time since meeting him, Naomi saw real fear. Not stress, not anger, fear. Then Richard slowly turned toward her and smiled. Dangerously. You want truth? He asked quietly. The room became silent again. Richard pointed directly at Naomi. She benefited from the fraud too. Gasps exploded across the room. Everything stopped. Every eye turned toward Naomi. Richard Vaughn stepped closer, slowly. She approved financial negotiations knowing the risks, he continued. Lawyers immediately began whispering. Board members looked desperate for someone else to blame. Naomi remained completely still. Inside, her pulse hammered. Richard was trying to bury her beside the company. Classic survival strategy. If I fall, he said coldly, everyone falls. For several terrifying seconds, silence controlled the room. Then Daniel Reed entered. Unexpected. Exhausted. Ashamed. But determined. I gave her the evidence, Daniel announced loudly. The room turned toward him. Daniel walked beside Naomi. She tried stopping this from the beginning. Richard stared at him with pure hatred. Daniel continued. I helped hide the fraud, not her. One executive cursed loudly. Another collapsed into his chair. Daniel placed printed emails across the table. Signed approvals. Secret payments. Deleted records. Everything connected directly to Richard Vaughn. The room descended into chaos. Lawyers shouted. Executives argued. Phones rang endlessly. Then the boardroom doors opened. Federal agents entered. Nobody moved. Richard looked around desperately. His empire disappeared in real time. The same people who once worshipped him now avoided eye contact completely. Naomi watched silently. No satisfaction. No celebration. Only exhaustion. Richard suddenly turned toward her. You think this changes anything? He whispered. Naomi finally answered. Yes. Richard laughed bitterly. There will always be another company, another fraud, another Richard Vaughn. Naomi stepped closer. Maybe. She paused. But today they watched someone finally say no. Federal agents placed Richard in handcuffs. The room watched silently. Nobody laughed anymore. Nobody smiled. Hours later, Naomi exited the building through a crowd of reporters. Cameras flashed endlessly. Questions exploded around her. But Naomi kept walking quietly through the chaos. And for the first time in weeks, Chicago no longer felt cold. Richard Vaughn's arrest dominated national headlines for weeks. More executives faced charges. Political investigations expanded. Investors lost fortunes. Vaughn and Mercer officially collapsed less than 2 months later. But before liquidation finalized, federal protection secured partial pension recovery for thousands of employees. Naomi made sure of it. Marcus Hale eventually testified fully. His cooperation reduced prison time. Daniel Reed disappeared from corporate finance entirely. Nobody heard much from him afterward. Maybe guilt finally became too heavy. As for Naomi Carter, the world suddenly treated her differently. News networks requested interviews. Magazines called her courageous. Financial firms offered massive positions. But Naomi turned almost all of them down, because something inside her changed permanently. One quiet afternoon, she returned to the rehabilitation center carrying coffee for her father. He looked stronger now, healthier. The moment he saw her smile, he laughed softly. You look peaceful. Naomi sat beside him. For the first time in a long time, her father nodded slowly. They laughed because they couldn't see your worth. Naomi looked down quietly. All her life, people underestimated her. Teachers, executives, investors, board members. But her father always saw her clearly. That mattered more than any headline ever could. Months later, Naomi officially left corporate finance. Instead, she launched a foundation helping overlooked young professionals from struggling communities enter business and leadership careers. No hidden fees, no corruption, no empty promises, just opportunity. The first office opened in Chicago, then Detroit, then Atlanta. One evening, Naomi stood alone inside the foundation's new downtown building, watching sunset light spill across the city. Young students laughed nearby, while mentors prepared workshops. Life, real life. Not greed, not corruption, not fear. Her phone buzzed. A news alert. Richard Vaughn sentenced to federal prison. Naomi stared at the screen briefly, then locked her phone. Because revenge no longer interested her. Peace did. She stepped outside into the cool Chicago evening while traffic moved steadily through the glowing streets below. For a moment, she simply stood there, breathing quietly. Free. The city lights stretched endlessly around her. And somewhere behind those lights, thousands of people slept easier because one woman refused to stay silent. Naomi smiled softly to herself. Then she walked forward into the night. The people who laughed the loudest never realized they were witnessing the strongest woman in the room.
Have you ever been underestimated? It's a feeling many of us know. Share your story in the comments. Let's connect and grow together. If this story inspired you, subscribe, like, and turn on the notification bell. From this vantage, the city reminds us, true legacy begins within. Embrace the silence, build your truth, and let growth shape your destiny. Your critics do not determine your future. Your legacy is built by the choices you make when nobody is watching. This is Legacy Within, where every soul carries a story. I'll see you in the next one.